Hello, everyone. Welcome to the City Council meeting of the City of Placerville, regular City Council meeting, October 10th, 2017. Would you all rise and please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Well, now we can't call the roll because he's not here.
Well, he can come in.
That's
late.
true. We'll just go ahead and call the roll. You can observe him coming in.
Councilmember Borelli,
Here.
Mayor Clarici,
Here.
Vice Mayor Thomas,
Here.
Councilmember Wilkins,
Here.
Councilmember Acuna.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay. Announcements, presentations to the public, brief comments by the City Council. Tricia, do you have a brief comment of anything?
Nope.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Mark, do you have a brief comment? I'm kind of go back.
Yeah,
and-
good. I like
Okay.
it.
Mark, do you have a brief comment? Not at this time. Okay. Wendy, would you like to do a
Start
brief
with Patty.
comment? Patty, would you like to do a brief comment?
You know what? Just real quick, I got this in the mail, and I've talked to a few people that weren't aware of it. So I just wonder if everyone knows that this is from PG&E, and it said in collaboration with the City of Placerville, PG&E will be upgrading streetlights in your community. As part of our commitment to provide you with safe, reliable, and affordable energy, PG&E is replacing its PG&E-owned non-decorative streetlights with energy-efficient and longer-lasting light-emitting fixtures. And my street has been done, and it's absolutely spectacular. The light is just, it's just. So I said something, like I say, to a few people, and they didn't know about it. So in case any of you haven't heard, that's what's going on. And it says that they're going to replace 429 of PG&E-owned streetlights in the City of Placerville. The installation will take approximately 10 minutes per lamp fixture, and please keep in mind that our schedule is dependent on safe weather and field conditions. So
Cool. Well, thank you.
so I'm just passing
All
on
right.
that little bit.
Mayor?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Can I add to that? And first, I'll apologize. I should have let you know. I knew about that.
What are the secrets you're keeping from
It's
us?
actually going to save us about. It came up very short notice that I had to react and say, "Can we do it?" And it's going to save us about $20,000 a year in electricity costs.
That's
so,
remarkable.
So it is a
Very
good
nice.
thing for us. And there's also some instant savings in terms of a rebate. I think that we get access to.
Cool.
I'm trying to remember the exact amount on
Yeah,
that.
it's a really
Anyway,
good.
So just so you know.
Very nice.
Mr. Mayor,
Now you have a comment.
now I have a comment. Thanks to Councilmember Borelli. And it reminds me, it's nice that PG&E is fixing or replacing those 400 and some odd, but it would be even greater if PG&E would replace a number of the lights that are out in town. There are a couple of lights on Highway 49, right there at Spring and Highway 50 that have been out for over a year, and I know I've turned them in. So my request would be, Steve, you might want to leave, is if you see a light out there in your neighborhood, please do all of us a favor and call PG&E's 800 number and give them the best address that you can give them.
Well, there's an
We
address,
are-
there's a number on each pole. You
Well,
can,
certainly there isn't a perfect world. This is PG&E that we're talking about.
well, my
And
pole
so
has
to
a
do
number.
us a service, because we're paying for those lights, and there's a lot of them that are out. Patty's lucky she got them in her neighborhood. We have one on the whole south side of town that's been replaced. Seriously, it is coming on winter. The time is going to change in a couple of weeks, and they do not have the eyes in the field that they once had, meaning PG&E. So if you see one in your neighborhood, please call their 800 number and turn that in, because we're paying $12 to $14 a month for some of those lights, and we don't need them sitting up there
So
dark.
can I ask a question?
Thank you for that.
Cleve, how many, okay, maybe you don't know, but I think at one time because I brought this up several years ago about how many lights were out, and I was wondering how many we were being billed for, and I think, John, that's when you were still city manager and you looked into it. How many actually lights do we have? Do you number-wise, just off the top of your, I mean, they're replacing 400 and some odd, but how many, and why aren't they replacing them all?
They are replacing the ones they own. The others we own.
Oh, we own.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so they don't replace the ones we own. We would have to work on doing that ourselves.
That might be
and
something to look into.
It
you
is
know,
a project actually we looked at with Johnson Controls, and may come back to us at a future date,
Okay.
depending on how it works.
Because if this is saving us this much money, just imagine, you know, if we, okay, thank you.
Are we all done with streetlights?
I think so.
Cool. Wendy?
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you. Well, I don't know if some of you saw that we made Reader's Digest last month, and I'm going to read the excerpt from Reader's Digest. You're going to enjoy this. All right. So these are the smart people being very dumb is the category. And it's bonehead moves by politicians and bureaucrats. So I thought it'd be appropriate for a city council meeting.
Excuse me?
Yes, yeah, all right. So Washington, D.C. may be the bonehead capital of America, but it hasn't cornered the market on dimness. In Placerville, California, the pothole situation got so bad that residents took to spray painting rants and even explicit pictures near the worst cases to get the city's attention. It worked. The city sent out work teams. They removed the graffiti, but left the potholes. Well, obviously, they did not get the update because we are fixing those potholes. So, bonehead move is on
All
Reader's
right, it's
Digest.
your job to write to Reader's
I
Digest.
will
Let
correct
those
that.
Readers.
Just a little humor to start our meeting.
Reader's Digest. Now that is anachronistic if there ever is something. Okay.
Oh, that's funny.
Let's see. We have a couple things. One is next Saturday is our community service day. You can take your trash to the mosquito park and ride between I think 8 and 1 or 9 and 1. It's something like that. I don't have the flyer in front of me, but it's something 8 to 1, and all the cool stuff you want to throw away you probably can't, like oil and toxic chemicals and stuff like that. But you can throw your trash away. They'll also have folks there that'll do gently used items like for Goodwill or whatever. There'll be some folks like that. So bring it all over there and you can get rid of it and you don't have to pay anything. So that's really cool. I think also too, since we've had a number of natural disasters here in the last few months, certainly hurricanes and stuff in the Gulf and other places. Of course, we all live in earthquake and fire country, and there's some really massive fires going on over in Napa and Santa Rosa, that part of the world. So, and I know we're already doing this, but let's just all keep those people in our thoughts. What's happening there could happen here at any time. And so when you live in fire country, you just it's something you live with, and they're just having to live with it in a real big way. So let's just all keep them in our thoughts and prayers and whatnot. So anyway, that was my announcement. Now we're going to go intentionally left blank, which is like my favorite part of the agenda. It's intentionally left blank. I guess I could add anything I wanted to. So let's adopt this agenda. Somebody want to adopt this agenda?
Move for adoption.
Second.
Okay, you can choose who seconded that. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, there are no ceremonial matters. Public comment, brief non-agenda items. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the council on any matter not on the agenda that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the City Council. State law prohibits the council from acting on items not listed on the agenda except by special action of the City Council under very specific circumstances. The mayor reserves the right to limit the speaker's time to 3 minutes. The mayor will recognize you, and when you come to the microphone, please state your name for the record. Be nice. Don't say anything you wouldn't want to have somebody say about you. Do we have any written correspondences, Mr. Manager?
None tonight.
We do not. Okay. The microphone is open.
Thank you for seeing me today. My name is Ken Shapiro, and I've been here living up by Lumsden Park for 30 years. And I'm glad you brought up Napa, because when I go to work, the homeless are doing a lot of fires up there. I put out probably 3 or 4 fires a month. There's a little big barbecue pit in Lumsden Park that they have big fires going every night. I come home at 12 from my restaurant or 2 o'clock, and there's nobody around, but I always have water in the car to put it out. When I phone the dispatch, they tell me, wait till something catches on fire. Well, there's only one problem with that. My house is the only house. My other's neighbor house last year burnt down. So maybe we could do something about the homeless that are at Lumsden Park. Maybe we could do something about the needles at Lumsden Park. I have to take my little puppy over to Lions Park because she will chew all the heroin that is at the park there. Now, I've been here many times over the years, so could we please, before we have another Napa problem, I was thinking, what if we took out that big barbecue, put a small one, so then they can contain it? But it's going to happen quick. If there's a fire, I just don't want to be responsible for, my wife, my kids dying, or anybody in this room dying. So it can't be a sanctuary park. We need to change Lumsden Park to a park for children and regular people that go there. I brought thousands of pounds of trash to the dump over the years. I bring hundreds of needles to my restaurant in Sacramento. I give to the DEA down there. It's a problem that somebody needs to do something about. Or sell the park to me. I'll buy it. Just sell it to me. If you don't want to do anything with the park, sell it to me. I will police it. I will take care of it. And it's very simple. So please consider my situation. And if this was your front yard, what would you do? I'm the only guy that lives there. I'm one person, one vote. Is this the federal government? Or do you live here and you are my neighbors? If you're the federal government, that's okay, then I will not come here anymore. If you're my neighbors and you live here, please help me. And I hope everybody knows where Lumsden Park is. If not, I'll be more than happy to bring you over to Lumsden Park and show you where it is. It's only 5 minutes. So please come over and see what's going on. You don't need a police car to drive around all the community because all the heroin is being sold at the park. Every day I see it. Every day. I tell the police, but they'll bust the little guy with the marijuana cigarette. Who cares? They need to stop the heroin trade up there. So please consider it. I would like to take my little puppy dog to my house, my front yard. I hope the new chief, I'd like to meet him, and I hope maybe he has some solutions for this problem. But all the cops know me. I've talked to them. But please, just let me know if something's going to happen. Or I'd be more than happy to sit on that panel, and I will do something about it. So please, help me out. That's all I ask. Thank you for being my good neighbors. And sorry if I'm a little emotional, but as you know, 2 years ago, my neighbor's house burnt down. We put the little 1-year-old out of the house. How are you going to feel if my wife dies? How are you going to feel when a little girl steps on a needle and ends up with AIDS? Then we're going to do something? Now that burnt, 2,000 houses in 24 hours. Please, let's do something about it. I'm tired of talking. If you don't want me to come here anymore, I won't. But please, I love this community. I don't want it to burn down. So please help me out. Thank you very much for your time. I'm sorry if I talk too much. I'm sorry if I'm a little emotional, but I just like to see this. I'm tired of talking about it. Thank you, folks. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my name is Don Vanderkar, longtime resident. I was not planning to speak from this particular part of the meeting, but with the comments that were just made, I would like to point out a couple of things. I happen to live upslope from Lumsden Park and share the concern after seeing particularly what has happened over in Santa Rosa and Sebastopol area. The solution, I suggest, is a place for the homeless people to be, so they're not camping in Lumsden Park and elsewhere and being a nuisance. We desperately need a shelter. Some of you know I'm greatly involved with a nomadic shelter. We're struggling to find adequate churches to open doors so that we can get homeless people sheltered this winter and away from building fires and causing nuisances that goes with the territory with homeless people. I certainly recognize that. Study after study shows that providing housing is the solution. We need to carefully consider where we can provide shelter for these people so they are not on our streets, not building fires in Lumsden Park and endangering everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the council? Well, thank you very much. Okay. Chief, you can chat with the gentleman if you haven't already. That would be my first suggestion, and then we can talk about this some more. It is a big problem. I understand it. We're not trying to dismiss it at all. We do know that these issues exist in a number of public spaces in our community, and they're impacting it. And we've heard the same thing about the trail, and we've heard that same thing about other places in town. So, I don't think that makes you feel better to know that there's other problems out there, but it is something that we take very seriously, and we are certainly working with our various folks here in the city to help out with the problem. So it's a thorny issue, and we continue to try to do best management practices to figure out a way to deal with it. So thank you. Anyway, thank you very much. Okay. The consent calendar. All matters listed under the consent calendar are considered routine and will be enacted by one motion by roll call vote unless any member of the council wishes to remove any item for discussion. The reading of the full text of all resolutions will be waived unless a council member requests otherwise. Anyway, see, there you go, right there. Okay, so does any of the city council members wish to pull an item? Okay. Are there any questions about any of the items up here about, any questions up here? Are there any questions from any of the council members about any of the items on the consent calendar? Okay. Okay. I guess the only thing I would want to observe is there is an item about Clay Street. Clay Street's one of those items that's always kind of on everybody's or some people's radar. This is purely administrative. We are not, this does not mean that Clay Street is going to happen. It doesn't mean anything except there's contractual differences now. There were something that I guess Caltrans inspired, and so we are having to make our contracts fit with their contracts. Isn't that the case?
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council.
Yeah.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. It doesn't mean any money, nothing's happening, no dirt is being turned. We're just dealing with a contractual thing to make sure our contracts and Caltrans's verbs are all the same thing. So that's that. Would the public like to comment on our consent calendar? It's pretty exciting. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll bring it back here. Would somebody like to make a
Move
motion?
approval of this consent calendar?
Second.
Okay, you can do the, yeah. Can we have a roll call?
Councilmember Acuna?
Aye.
Councilmember Borelli? Mayor Clarici?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Thomas?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilkins?
Aye.
Okay. Let's see, ordinances 10.1. Adopt a resolution extending an urgency ordinance of the City of Placerville regulating cultivation and prohibiting the manufacture, processing, laboratory testing, labeling, storing, wholesale, and retail distribution of non-medical marijuana in the City of Placerville pursuant to Government Code Section 65858A. Mr. Morris.
Actually, I'm going to turn this over to our city attorney, Mr. Driscoll, to handle this.
City
item.
Attorney.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Mr. Morris. Tonight's action, the request is to simply extend the urgency ordinance that was adopted last November and extended once on December 13th of last year. Government Code Section 65858A allows for these extensions. This would be the final extension, and it can be for up to 1 year. The current expiration date is October 28th of 2017, which means that if extended, it could be extended up until October 27th of 2018. Excuse me. Rather than give a sentence by sentence or a detailed description of what's in the staff report, I thought I'd try and present a simpler version. There's a lot of information in that staff report, and some of it is a little on the technical nature, but I'd rather give the council an overview from 30,000 feet, and then if you have additional questions, we can discuss those. Basically, we're dealing with legislation and Proposition 64, this voter initiative that was passed last November, commonly known as UMA, the Adult Use of Marijuana Act. The other legislation that comes into play is MMRSA, which was changed to MCRSA, which is Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act. Prop 94 actually combines the regulations, and I haven't got to that. Prop 94 was passed, and it's not Prop 94, it's SB 94, was passed this year by the legislature. And what that does is combine the regulations for both medical and non-medical marijuana. Prior to that, UMA regulated non-medical marijuana or recreational marijuana, and MCRSA, as its name was changed to Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act, regulated the medical marijuana. Local jurisdictions can prohibit or regulate medical marijuana and non-medical or recreational marijuana, except for, as a result of Prop 64, we cannot prohibit non-commercial cultivation of up to 6 plants per household. Everything else is pretty much fair game for regulation by local jurisdictions. Medical marijuana is not subject to state or local sales tax. That's as a result of UMA, but it is subject to excise tax, both at the state and local level. Non-medical marijuana is subject to both state and local sales tax as well as state and local excise taxes. UMA placed a excise tax on marijuana, a state excise tax, in the amount of 15%. There's also a tax on the cultivation of marijuana. State sales tax on non-medical marijuana is 7.25%, regular state sales tax. Local excise taxes vary and are generally based upon gross receipts. I think I gave some examples in the staff report of 4% to 10% of gross receipts. It can be higher than that. And one of the problems you have, and I pointed out in the staff report, is the taxes that local jurisdictions can place on marijuana could actually drive it into the black market if they get too high. I mean, if you take the 15% and the 7.5% sales tax, you've already got 22.5% right there. Add to that a local excise tax of, say, 10%, you're up 32.5%. So you're going to either drive, if the intent is to try and get the tax receipts from marijuana sales, you're going to drive them to other jurisdictions because your tax is going to be so high, or you're going to drive it into the black market. And that's what the commentators tend to point out. There's also some issues that need to be thought about when you're looking at potentially regulating marijuana and allowing it, the sales of marijuana, medical or otherwise. And that is that it's very difficult for local jurisdictions to keep tabs on those sales because, bear in mind, marijuana is a federal offense, the sale of marijuana. And they're not allowed to put their money in banks. Banks won't accept the cash that marijuana dealers get, or checks even for that matter. So they have to keep it all on the premises in terms of cash. The transaction, that makes the transactions very difficult to trace, to make sure that the tax is being reported properly, and creates a bookkeeping nightmare for somebody like Dave Warren and his department to try and figure out if somebody's paying their tax appropriately. There's a special fund that the state has created for the sales, or for the excise tax proceeds, not the sales tax, but the excise tax proceeds, and they're discussed in the staff report. Those funds are a number of them that deal with the study of the impact of recreational marijuana, different grants to communities for mental health, job placement, nonprofits, all relating to substance abuse programs, $3 million to the CHP to establish protocols to determine if a driver is impaired, another $2 million to the University of California at San Diego to study marijuana as a pharmacological agent. I didn't say that right. And then there's additional funds that would be left over that technically could go to youth programs regarding substance abuse prevention and treatment, 20% to environmental cleanup and remediation, and 20% to DUI and negative health impacts from marijuana legislation. There are other potential sources of the proceeds if there's anything left over after you get through all of that. And I should point out that, at least with respect to one source, communities, local jurisdictions that ban the use of marijuana are prevented from receiving those funds. And it's kind of an obscure section of legislation, but it's grants to the Board of State and Community Corrections for making local grants to local governments to assist with law enforcement, fire protection, and other local programs addressing public health and safety associated with implementation of the AUMA, the adult use of marijuana. And I've spoken with the chief about that. He's familiar with what those grants are. Frankly, there's so much money going out to other sources, and unless they really get a windfall, I'm not sure there'd be money left over for those purposes. But it's something certainly to consider. And I say that because the issue tonight is really to extend the ordinance. And it's needed because if you don't extend the ordinance, you're going to leave a void in our regulations. And you're going to let the city fall basically to default to the state regulations, whatever they might be. One of the things that SB 94 did was delay the establishment of the state regulations. The commercial sale of recreational marijuana was supposed to start in January 1st of this coming year, and the regulations were supposed to be out by then. And the state has a process they have to go through. They have to publish these regulations, they get reviewed, all this types of stuff. Well, when 94 was passed and it combined both medical and non-medical marijuana and regulations under the same jurisdiction, if you will, it basically delayed the establishment of those regulations. They're expected to come out this fall, and they're going to be in an emergency track to try and get them in place by January 1st. But if the council was interested, let's say in, well, first of all, I think that council will need to know what those regulations are going to be before you can make an informed decision on whether you want to default to the state regulations or do something on your own. And if you don't default to the state regulations, then you're either going to have to make your urgency ordinance, interim emergency ordinance, a permanent ordinance, whereby it would basically ban the sales and all other activities with regard to medical and non-medical marijuana. You could differentiate between medical and non-medical marijuana, and you could allow one and not the other, or both. But in order to do that, you're going to need to see what the state regulations say and develop your own regulations, because many of the commentators that have indicated with respect to this have indicated that if you're going to regulate it, make sure you regulate everything you feel you need to regulate. Don't leave anything untouched. So it's kind of a very complicated area. We're asking tonight simply to extend the interim ordinance so that we have the time to review the state regulations and give the council enough information so that you can make an informed decision as to where you want to go with this. And it doesn't have to take a year. We can come back sooner than a year and take the action.
So but we can extend it a year?
You can extend it up to a year,
1
yes.
year.
And that's what we're asking for, so we have the time. But we don't have to wait until the expiration of that year before we come back.
Okay. Well, thank you for that.
Well,
Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
It really doesn't have to do much with the vote, but maybe John can help from my own curiosity.
Yeah.
Okay, so medical only has excise tax, medical marijuana.
correct.
Does like Vicodin and Percocet, do those have excise taxes?
You know, I don't think so, but I don't know.
I don't think so.
I mean, they're drugs.
Yeah, I think there's no
You know,
taxes
the
on them.
the excise tax on marijuana is, and this is why I say I don't think so, is as a result of legislation that is particular to
Right.
marijuana and not other drugs.
But
if you
only
will.
the medical, well, the other one, the recreational has
Both.
all three taxes. But
Yes, yes, but medical
medical
only
still has
has
the excise?
state excise taxes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you. Okay. Anyone else have any questions? Yes, go right ahead.
John, that was a very effective staff report. Thank you very much for helping us, differentiate through all the issues and complex issues regarding this. A couple quick questions. So if we were to move forward and allow this, it would have to go to the vote of the people in order to establish a city tax rate on this
Yes.
item.
Any tax would be subject to the vote of
To
people.
the vote of the people.
The other regulations would not be.
Right, exactly.
But that's beyond the
The
already
s-
existing excise and sales tax. So for example.
Beyond the 22.5%.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, in town here, we would have, whatever our sales tax is plus the excise.
We would
tax.
get a percentage
But
of
if
the
you
state
wanted
sales
more,
tax.
Exactly.
then you'd have to go on.
So my question is that would be a special tax requiring a supermajority?
Depending on the purpose of the proceeds from the tax. It could be a general tax, or it could be a special
Oh,
tax.
really?
Yes.
Okay, that's
Either way.
interesting. Okay, oh, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. All right. And so if we were to go to imposing additional taxes on marijuana, we would be looking at perhaps next fall's election. So we would need to make a ruling by May on this?
Yes, because the earliest we can bring it to the vote of the people is the next general election, which is next November.
Which is, you're right. And I know this is a very, very fluid issue that requires careful thought. John and I went to a very effective session at the League of California Cities on marijuana this last month. You were there too, Rebecca, weren't you? I mean, it was fascinating to hear all of the challenges. And one of the main growers in California, he was a very effective speaker, and he did share validated what you said, that if you get too high on a local tax, you do drive it underground. And he said it's about a 3 to 7% tipping point that cities have to play with, and most cities are in that range. So
I think Sacramento's 4. Davis was a little higher; it was 10. But there's others that are higher than that. But most of them, I think, are in that 3 to 7.
Consensus is 3 to 7 is the range. But interesting food for thought. All right, thank you very much.
And I guess from a practical standpoint, if the council were to go ahead and say, yeah, we'll allow sales within the city limits, that could be initiated sooner, well, after January 1st.
Yes.
If you wanted, and then we would just collect whatever sales tax we get. Like if we sell refrigerators, we get a sales tax, and this would be that. Okay. If we wanted additional stuff, then that would have to go out into the November thing. But they're not coupled together. They could exist. You could start and then ask for more money.
Yes.
Yeah. I got several emails. I don't know if any of the people that emailed me are here today, but I got several people that emailed me and said they were generally in favor of the concept. I did get back to them finally today. Sorry about the delay, but and basically said to them, and this is for public consumption, what we're doing tonight is just to create, as John said, create some space for us. There are no regulations, and we do not want to be held to the gentle mercies of the state of California in this regard. I mean, they may come up with some very good regulations, and we might go, yeah, those are fine, and they'll be okay. I don't want to risk that, though. I want to certainly have us be in control of that particular thing. And then we will have a public process, and this is certainly something that the community will want to weigh in on, and other things. So, and right now what I'd like to do, and I think we're starting to do, and this was something I commented at the League of California Cities was, it's pretty easy to dive into the weeds. Oh, God, I almost said dive into the weeds. I almost said that. And I wasn't even trying to say it, and I almost said it. That's just like the strangest thing. It's pretty easy to get to the inside baseball part of this thing and start worrying about excise taxes and additional taxes and all the other stuff. And there's some very nuts and bolts kinds of answers and questions that I think need to be done. And I told this league that, and I've told SACOG that. I've said, these organizations could do us very well by starting to collect that data, best management practices, places where it's failed and why, places where it's succeeded and why, and then we can compare and contrast that with our community and see what if there is a right fit, what that right fit might be. This is the beginning of a journey, and so we'll kind of see how it goes. But I wanted to let the public know that we're not making a decision in the long term. Now, it might very well be that we decide that this is something we don't want to be involved in, and the city council might take that action, and then some future city council may decide something different. But right now, we're not making that action, and that's important, I think, for the public to know, and that we will have a public process, and then we'll talk about everything, and we'll bring in all the appropriate facts. So anyway, I just want to comment on that to the public. Are there any more questions before I open?
I don't have any questions, but I do have a comment. As you know, I went with the Chamber of Commerce on their fact-finding trip this year, and we went to Seattle. And one of the things that was arranged for us was to we went to it was to find out about Seattle, because Washington they're able to, it's like Colorado. Anyway, they arranged for us to take a fact-finding tour on cannabis, and we visited retail stores, we visited grow houses, and we had quite a lengthy explanation about what we were seeing and what was going on. And I have to tell you, it was an eye-opener. And what Wendy and John were saying that they heard at the League of Cities, and I know that all this is being, opinions are being formed and how it's going to, but basically what I want to talk about is regulations, because what impressed me the most, I think, and what I was really surprised, is how highly regulated it is. And I have to say, and we have to look at both sides. I mean, there's people that want it and people that don't, and we have to look at both sides. But I'm wondering, and I know the state, it starts at the state, and I'm sure that they're investigating probably Washington and Colorado to see how they're handling it and how it's, if it's working, what's not. But I would say that most of us that were on the trip were impressed with the regulations. It almost seemed, and I know there's stuff that goes on that we don't know anything about, but the way it was presented to us it looked like it was almost impossible for anybody to try to get away with something. Everything was so, the bookkeeping and it was just amazing. We couldn't believe it. And one of the questions that, a lot of us ask is just what John was talking about, is when you have all these, because I think 50% of their profits or whatever is taken, it goes to the state and taxes and whatnot. So we were questioning how, when it's so highly taxed, how does that do away with illegal growing? Because to me, that's what was our first thought. And one of the things that they said to us is that you're not under the eye of the law all the time. I mean, you're not there. They're not in the fields holding guns and stuff. And so they're, people, it's legal. And then another thing that I had no idea, I became so, I was just glad, I was like, but they were saying like these outdoor illegal fields that it takes a year to harvest the crops, and they showed us in these grow houses, it takes 2 months. And so that's, the turnover is, so anyway, I just think it's very interesting, and I hope that when we do have to make this decision, that we're given a lot of what's been done, the programs and stuff, maybe, and have some, so anyway, it was quite interesting.
I might just indicate that a number of jurisdictions which were looking at taking some action prior to January 1st are now postponing it.
Yes.
Because of what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very fluid issue.
Because, there's, like I say, two sides, and we have to listen to it all, but it was interesting.
Yes. By almost every measure that I've ever been aware of, if it was a legal crop, it would be the most expensive. It would be the number one by dollar crop in the state. It would eclipse even almonds, which it's hard to believe that almonds are very pricey, even more than almonds. Okay.
Mr.
All right. Yes.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes,
You've
sir.
all done a lovely job in setting the stage for the question that I would like to ask the city manager. First of all, I'd like to thank the city attorney for his 30,000-foot overview of a very complex issue. And unfortunately, listening to Councilmember Borelli, I'm sitting here thinking, folks that don't want to follow your regulations aren't going to follow the regulations. And so there'll still be a tremendous black market. This is a very complex issue, as many municipalities are finding out, and the state has left us so far with no guidance as what they're going to do. This is going to take a significant amount of staff time to do this correctly, I would suspect. Cleve, have you given any thought as to the time and who you would involve in doing the next steps to bring back the review and develop the regulations that our staff members are going to think are best for the city of Placerville?
I have not in terms of staffing. I just pretty much assumed it's going to be in my office with the assistance of the city attorney. As you've heard, him and I have tried to stay up on it as much as we can. I've gone to or listened to several webinars on it and tried to follow it, information that I've received on it. And it's like I say, it's not going to be an easy task, and depending on what direction we want to go with, we'll have to decide that. But we will. It's another one of those. There's a lot of information out there that we can draw from. A lot of information from the League of California Cities. I attended a dinner actually with our sales tax people, HDL. They also have a cannabis section in their company, if you can call it that, that is very knowledgeable, and they've been doing consulting and assisting. So that's another resource that we can draw on if necessary to get the information that we need. But yeah, I fully believe that it will work within the city manager's office with the assistance of the city attorney if I can talk him into it. So.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Okay.
It's going to be interesting, huh?
It always is. Everything we do is interesting. Okay, would the public like to speak on this item?
Rod Miller. I'm an owner at the Good Earth Movement on Main Street in downtown Placerville here. And I want to recognize and appreciate your keeping an open mind on this issue. I think it's a real opportunity for the city of Placerville. I worked for the city of Folsom for 18 years, and I know that for small local governments, rarely is there an opportunity to have new revenue sources. And from what I've been hearing earlier in this meeting, you have some uses for those revenues. And I know also that it's a challenge for local governments to be innovative. But clearly the state is going to have a large ream of regulations designed to mitigate nuisances. The SB 97 and the Chapter 27 is like 140 pages, all details of what the legal business has to do. But fundamentally, I think this is a real opportunity for the city of Placerville. I know as a business on Main Street, the majority of our business is from people driving through Placerville on their way to somewhere else. And having retail commercial cannabis in Placerville will give people another reason to get off Highway 50. Also, it would provide a number of jobs for folks that aren't the most skilled. And with respect to cash issues, folks can just walk over to your office by the parking garage and hand you cash to pay for their tax receipts. That's what we have to do. We can do that to pay our business licenses. Truly, I think you all get it that in order to eliminate the black market, you have to have a legal market out compete it. And particularly if the county says no to commercial cannabis, there's going to be some real significant business opportunities here in El Dorado County. So I would encourage you to think innovative and look forward and provide another reason for folks to come to Placerville. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We were discussing some of your points. I was. Anyway, does anybody else wish to speak on this item? Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for those comments. Okay, like I said, we really have two big. The one issue is just the extension of the thing, and that's fine. I have a sneaking feeling that a lot of what we're talking about today in 5 or 10 years is either going to be the biggest mistake was ever made in the history of anything, or we're going to look back on it and we're going to go, oh yeah, we used to worry about that thing, and now we don't, and who knows how that's going to go. But there's a lot of things to think about, and we will think about them, and we'll talk about them, and of course it's all done right here in public. So once we start to amass that information, probably besides, I would maybe like to have us come up with a sort of just a real quick, not right now, a time frame for maybe when we start to talk about it and everything else. Probably wouldn't be a bad idea to know what the county's up to. I know what they're sort of talking about right now. To sort of move this thing forward and get it out in the public square and talk about it. So especially if January 1st does remain the date, And I think we can get through it fairly quickly. I know there's a lot of moving parts, but I have a sneaking feeling that we could probably get through it fairly quickly. So that's would be my suggestion also. Besides, does somebody want to move the agenda item?
I'll move for approval of the agenda
I'll
item.
second.
Okay.
I like your idea of establishing a rough idea soon as to when we hope to have this back.
When we start to go through all this stuff and let folks know. Because I'm sure there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there that are very excited about this prospect. And
I think we're all open to looking at it with a creative mind. Appreciate your comments,
yes,
Mr. Miller.
Yeah, thank you very much. Anyway, so we have do we have to roll call this? Okay. Let us call the roll, please. That's right.
Councilmember Acuna?
Aye.
Councilmember Borelli?
Aye.
Mayor Clarici?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Thomas?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilkins?
Aye.
Is there any chance that I will remember by the end of the year which ones we have to take a roll call and which ones we...
Anything?
Money and ordinance.
Money
Thank
and
you.
ordinance.
You'd think after almost 10 months of this, I'd know I'd remember what's going on. Anyway, okay. Anyway, thank you very much for your comments, and this is, it'll be interesting, to say the least. When I was a teenager, I never thought I'd actually ever live long enough to have this be a thing that would be talked about at a city council. It's kind of like, it's sort of, yeah, it's like really kind of otherworldly. Okay, 10.2. We're going to introduce and waive the first reading of an ordinance pertaining to accessory dwelling units and zoning text amendments to Title 10, Placerville zoning ordinance, to bring the zoning ordinance into compliance with California state law as amended by AB 2299 and SB 1069. I'm assuming this is, Andrew? Is he here? Mr. Rivas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Tonight's action is the first reading of a proposed changes to the zoning ordinance to bring it into conformance with recent passage of changes to the state housing law under Assembly Bill 2299 and Senate Bill 1069 that went into effect of January of this year regarding secondary dwelling units, which we will now call accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. The state legislature declared the importance of addressing California's housing needs in its action to amend the housing law, finding that ADUs are a valuable means of providing additional rental housing stock, providing housing for family members, for students, the elderly, disabled, and it can also provide homeowners with a benefit from added income. These proposed amendments to the zoning code would bring the city's code into conformity with the recent changes in state housing law and would also support the city's housing element, in particular policy C3, which encourages the use of regulatory incentives as tools to assist in affordable housing development, such as the change before you. Staff is recommending that the council consider the proposed changes that would, one, replace in its entirety the section for regulating secondary dwelling units section with the titled section accessory dwelling units. Two, we would also add some definitions of terms to the zoning code that would support the new ordinance. And then three, also amend all references within our zoning code of the term secondary dwelling unit and replace it with the term accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. Just to give a little background, under the changes to state law, any existing municipal codes that do not meet the requirements of state law shall be considered null and void. So in other words, our current ordinance is null and void. The city's existing secondary dwelling unit section does not meet the current new state law. Until the city adopts an ordinance that complies with the state law, it must apply the new standards in state law for approval of accessory dwelling units. Typically, how many do we see as a city? Well, since 2008, the city has issued a total of 5 permits for accessory dwelling units, so we don't see a whole lot. Permit review. Under the state government code, it requires any local agency that does not have an ADU ordinance that is consistent with the amendments of the government code in place relating to when it receives a permit to create an ADU, the local agency must accept the application and approve or disapprove the application ministerially, meaning without discretionary review, such as a site plan review that would go to the Planning Commission. Earlier this year, a building permit was issued for a new ADU where the city applied the new state standards. The state government code also requires that local ordinances must include an approval process for ADUs that includes only ministerial approval and shall not include any discretionary process, provisions, or requirements for those units. The government code does provide an exception to this. Examples would include authorizing a planning commission to hear and decide applications for conditional uses, variances, or other permits when the zoning ordinance provides, and that approval must be within 120 days after receiving the application. So the proposed amendments are as follows. Amendment number 1 of the draft proposed ordinance in proper form. The proposed amendments will do the following. 1, we will amend Section 4 of Chapter 1 of Title 10, adding the definition of terms to support the new ordinance. 2, replace in its entirety Section 12, secondary dwelling units of Chapter 4 of Title 10, with Section 12 that's titled accessory dwelling units. And then 3, amend all references of secondary dwelling units within Chapter 5 of the zoning regulations, replacing it with accessory dwelling units. And that would be more specifically within the RE, R1A, R1 6000, R1 10,000, R1 20,000, and then the R2, 3, 4, and 5 of the zoning classification districts. In addition, under the authority granted by the government code regarding aesthetic provisions and for processing ADUs within residential zone properties listed on the California Register of Historic Places or the Placerville Historic Resource Inventory, or if it is within a city-adopted historic district, these are retained from the city's existing secondary dwelling unit provisions under 10412. And I think the council should take note of that, because in the past I know the council has always been concerned with maintaining the city's historic character and culture, and so we would provide that if an applicant were to make a request for an ADU that happens to be on a property that's historic or within a historic district, the city then has the ability to run that application through the site plan review process before the Planning Commission. So staff was very pleased about that ability to do that. These provisions sustain the requirements that any new residential building and exterior changes to the existing residential buildings within the city historic districts or exterior changes to those that are deemed to have historic or aesthetic value, where those changes can be visible from a public street, to the architecture of the existing buildings to create an ADU, shall meet the historic criteria requirements of 10.4.10b, which is the Secretary of Interior Standards for Rehabilitation and Guidelines for Rehabilitating Historic Buildings, and shall also comply with the requirements of City Code Sections 10-4-9, which is our site plan review process, and then 10-4-10, which is in regulation of historic buildings in the city. The Planning Commission did consider the proposed zoning ordinance amendments back on September 5th of this year and recommended that the City Council adopt the proposed ordinance as recommended by staff. So in conclusion, staff does believe that the proposed amendments would bring the local code into consistency with the recent state law changes and support the city's existing general plan housing element policy, which encourages the use of regulatory incentives as tools to assist affordable housing development. Therefore, staff recommends that the City Council introduce and waive the first reading of an ordinance pertaining to accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, and the zoning text amendments to Title 10 of the Placerville zoning ordinance. And that concludes staff's report. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
Does anyone have any questions for staff? I assume so, but over there?
No.
Okay. Wendy?
I have a quick one right now. Thank you, Pierre. You mentioned the ADUs in historical districts, and that's my question centers around that. Although you allayed some of my concerns by citing the number of requests we've had for such dwelling units. However, I notice on 11D that when an ADU is located in the historic district, that the requirement for on-site parking is waived in a historic district. And we have so many small, narrow roads within the city. Is there any mechanism for staff to look at the impact to cars within a historical district once an ADU application comes before the city?
Our discretionary review would be basically limited to maintaining the historic character of that ADU that is proposed within an historic district, and so it is the state's codes that's sort of preempting the city from imposing the additional parking.
Oh, I see.
So the parking really doesn't have a whole lot to do with maintaining the history or the historic character.
And
of
yet
the
it
historic
would
district.
if everyone put in ADUs and they each had 2 additional cars on the street. I mean, that would greatly impact our neighborhoods, and yet we have no way to regulate that at all or to even look at it?
That's correct.
Wow, that's a little
But
bit
that's
of a
why
concern.
we wanted to bring up that, some statistics showing that they're not a very, let's just say, popular at this point in time. Usually in San Francisco, the Bay Area, some of those cities where housing is extremely tight and there's potential for money to be made, a good return on your investments, so to speak. That's where you see a lot of the accessory dwelling units being built.
And I suppose in our historical districts, there's not a lot of land, and of course any ADU would have to apply to our setbacks and all that, so they would not be possible in every lot.
Right, that is correct. Accessory dwelling units would be subject to meeting all of the required setbacks. There is an exception, and that exception, if I can find it, basically allowed for if the ADU was being developed through the conversion of, say, a detached garage, and that garage is within the setback, as long as it meets 5 feet or more, then it's fine. But if it's closer than that, then the city could deny that request. But an ADU would be subject to the development standards within the particular zone district it's to be located in. And then the owner developer would have the option of applying for a variance to waive any of the development standards. As you pointed out, the setbacks, height requirements, and the like.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yes, sir, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Pierre, thank you very much for bringing this forward. I think this is probably the 3rd name the state has given to this type of housing in my tenure as a planning commissioner and a city council member. And I appreciate your efforts on this, and Andrews and the planning commissions. It's a very important step as we deal with affordable housing here in the state of California. I'm surprised that the numbers were so low as far as permits. Some of the ones I know of must have not been permitted.
I'm thinking there were a lot of people didn't get permits.
Pierre has, on page 2 of the ordinance, under section 2, the easiest way I can describe this to you is it talks about under dwelling unit accessory, now ADU, used to be granny flat, secondary dwelling. It talks about converting the existing dwelling, units attached to the existing dwelling. The scenario I have in mind is an unfinished or partially finished basement on a hillside lot converted into an ADU now. Was that always allowed, or is that new?
That is always allowed.
That's always been allowed?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that. That was my question.
I'm still having a hard time with Wendy's question and that parking. I don't understand how the state can dictate that we have to approve something if there's not enough parking. I mean, that's the way I'm interpreting what you said. When, now, like when somebody applies for a building permit or whatever, you have to have a certain amount of parking. You have to prove that you have it. And to allow something like this, I don't get it. Or am I not supposed to?
Well,
Pierre?
Could you
And
deny
I'm just making
them?
assumptions that the state legislature is trying to do what they can to facilitate the creation of affordable housing units within single-family zone districts where feasible, and they were probably during the debates that took place at the state legislature trying to eliminate what may be impediments that may be thrown up against somebody trying to develop a accessory dwelling unit. And so we are allowed to require parking as shown on, page 4 of 9 under 10, but then there are those exceptions under 11, and those are right out of the state code, so there really was little room for the city to change that.
You done?
I'm done.
Okay. Would the public like to comment on this item? Okay, well, we'll bring it back here.
To attack Patty's concern perhaps from a different direction, Pierre, perhaps the very nature of the historic housing, due to the square footage, the size of the lots, and with or without a garage, would that in itself create kind of a self-restriction that those properties just wouldn't meet the criteria? Is that a possibility that would kind of maybe address some of Patty's concerns, the very nature of the old Victorian homes on the smaller lots with this little single-car garage that would hardly fit a Model T? You're not going to turn that into an accessory dwelling unit. It's not going to fit a lot of the criteria just by the nature of it being an old Victorian home. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And one thing that we did do is we set the minimum size of an ADU at 600 square feet.
Right.
I know there's a lot of talk about tiny homes, miniature homes, and staff is looking at that because we sort of see in the future the state may be coming in with additional regulations to address that. Hasn't happened yet. But there is a possibility that these units could get much smaller. Staff has received inquiries from the public as of late, asking what's the smallest dwelling unit that we can build. And I think you could probably get a unit down to 300 square feet and meet all the minimum requirements.
That's what tiny houses are.
We're
They're 200,
looking at
300.
what is the minimum tiny house based on all of the applicable building codes that would apply for a dwelling unit, and coming up with a figure, sort of planning ahead of what the state may impose later. But right now, we do have a 600 square foot. So I guess to more directly answer your question, Councilmember Acuna, is yes, I think it's sort of self-regulatory. You're not going to really see ADUs built in these real tiny postage stamp lots that are, for the most part, built out. We do have coverage requirements as well in the code that they would have to meet, or apply for a variance, which the city is under no obligation to grant.
Thank you. Thank you. Is that kind of...
Yeah.
It,
I mean, there's
it,
a,
that makes
it
some
does,
sense.
and yet I
It's-
keep thinking
it's
about.
not in writing, but...
I think about coming down Spring Street and people are parking in their yards because there's no place to park, and I just, wonder, are we going to create more of this? So.
pass a law. We're well, yeah. I mean, presumably, except for maybe a rental situation or like a Airbnb situation, there would be some practical components too. If you were providing a place to live, like a rental, but there was no place to park, I don't know how desirable that would be if you had to park, like on Spring Street, for example. There's no on-street parking, so you park kind of you park in your yard, or you only have one car or whatever it is to accommodate that, and then. If you could somehow figure out a way to shoehorn a building in there with it, but you'd have to park, I don't know, a quarter mile away. I don't know. It's a lot to think about. I'm not, anyway.
But do we need to think about it?
We should think, well, that's why we have
That's what I'm
talented
saying.
staff with brains. They think about
We don't have the option to think about it,
well,
though.
we don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. In some cases, where the thought process has been taken away. Okay. Did I go to the public?
No.
We did not. Okay. Would the public like to comment on this? I thought I did ask that. I did already. See, I know.
So they have.
I went to my.
Some vice mayor I am.
I went to my go-to memory cell over here, and she totally blew it.
I would like to ask one question. Of
Sure, go right.
Maybe the city manager and and Mr. Rivas, and that goes on to something that you said, Airbnbs, and I know it's a growing problem short-term vacation rentals and the property owners turning the homes into short-term vacation rentals and then removes that house from housing stock, then all the associated impacts. Is staff working on bringing forward in the next year, 18 months, whatever, some sort of a new ordinance that would address short-term vacation rentals in our existing neighborhoods?
Staff is, and if the council recalls, staff did bring a resolution of intent to amend the zoning code to address vacation rentals. Vacation rentals are under the definition of a motel or hotel. They're a lodging facility. They're a commercial use. So presently, vacation rentals, non-owner occupied, are not permitted in the city of Placerville. There is a section on our code, and I believe it's within each of our single-family residential districts, and that is the renting of one room. So you're looking at an owner of a home has the ability to rent one room, and it is silent on the term of that rental. So we don't know if the term is short-term or long-term. So from staff's perspective, we're being a little more liberal about the interpretation, and so if a owner of a single-family dwelling wants to rent out one room, either short or long-term, we allow it. We don't consider that a violation of our code. But staff is planning on bringing back to the council some proposed ordinances to regulate vacation rentals, and we look forward to bringing that to you, hopefully within the next 4 months.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
With that, I will move staff's recommendation to introduce and waive the first reading of the ordinance.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll? No. Dang, see, I can't remember from the previous item. I can't remember. Now it's just starting to get to be like.
And they're putting them in this order on purpose.
I know. That was. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you again, Mr. Rivas. I appreciate
I
it.
didn't vote
Very
against
welcome.
myself. I did. That is not inspired. Okay, we have no public hearings. Discussion and action items. 12.1, adopt a resolution authorizing the city manager to negotiate and execute a consulting services agreement with Robertson Bryan Inc., RBI, to conduct a zinc water effect ratio study in an amount not to exceed $78,115 and approving a budget appropriation in the amount of $33,150 from the Sewer Enterprise Fund contingency for unforeseen expenditures for the said agreement with RBI. Mr. Rivas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This is an item in regards to a zinc WER study, or water effects ratio study, in regards to zinc. And you got to ask yourself, well, what is zinc? Well, most men my age, their doctor says, you got to take supplements, take zinc. Well, zinc is a chemical element. It's a metal, which is regulated constituent of the treated water effluent that comes from our Hangtown Creek Water Reclamation Facility, and it's regulated by the Regional Water Quality Control Board under the Waste Discharge Requirements, or WDRs. Concentrations of zinc in surface waters are known to be hazardous to aquatic life. For example, concentrations of zinc can be toxic to plants and invertebrates and can adversely affect the amount of oxygen that fish can carry in their blood. So historically, the amount of zinc in the effluent, within the effluent of our plant, had exceeded the zinc limitations prescribed in our NPDES permit, and the Regional Water Quality Control Board in the past did issue a cease and desist order which provided the city with a time schedule for compliance with the zinc limitations. The city evaluated a number of different alternatives to achieve zinc compliance, including the addition of ferric chloride to the influent, which is what we currently do. The operational modifications with the addition of ferric chloride provided success to the city, and now the city enjoys zinc compliance and the termination of the cease and desist order from the regional board. Now, the current annual cost in the operation of adding this ferric chloride chemical feed system, including the estimated labor and materials for the operation of the UV disinfection system, the quartz bulb jacket cleaning, and laboratory collection and analysis for the zinc compliance verification, is about $54,500 per year. So that's what we spend to bring the zinc down to levels so we can meet our requirements. For the current year, the total cost is estimated to be about $72,500. The additional amount of the $18,000 would include the installation of a permanent ferric chloride chemical feeding pump system that would include redundancy, meaning to ensure uninterrupted reliability if there was a failure in that initial system, and a spill containment equipment. The current system was temporary to allow operational modifications and the determination of success. And it is successful, but it is expensive. What is a zinc water effects ratio study anyway? Well, staff in consultation with its consulting engineer, we all know Mr. Steve Herrera, is interested in pursuing the water effect ratio study to develop site-specific water quality criteria for the individual metal, in this case allowing for a lower limitation of zinc present in the water reclamation facility effluent that enters Hangtown Creek. The water effect ratio is defined as the ratio of the toxicity of a metal in site water to the toxicity of the same metal in standard laboratory water. So when the Environmental Protection Agency created the chemical or the toxic limitations for zinc, it was done in a laboratory. So a water effects ratio will allow us to study how the zinc levels when it's in Hangtown Creek and takes into consideration the alkalinity, the hardness, other chemicals and constituents in the creek water. Is it then still toxic to aquatic life? And that's what this WER study is all about. Water effect ratios are used to derive site-specific limitations for certain metals from national and state aquatic life criteria that were originally developed using laboratory toxicity data. The water effect ratio methodology has been developed to compensate for site-specific biogeochemical, don't you love some of these words from a non-engineer, factors such as water hardness, alkalinity, organic carbon, etc., which can influence the bioavailability and toxicity of metals. The WER study involves comparing the toxic level zinc in the laboratory to the toxic level of the zinc in the site water, which is Hangtown Creek water. If successful, the WRF would no longer be required to treat the influent for zinc. A WER result of approximately 1.2 or greater would justify a much less stringent influent zinc limit or eliminate the zinc limit entirely. And in our consultations with both Mr. Herrera and with the PhD chemists at Robertson Bryant, they think we stand a good chance of actually being successful with this study while we're bringing it forward. Robertson Bryant has submitted a proposal, which is attachment 2 of your staff report, to conduct the WER study consistent with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency guidance for WER studies. And this study would involve 4 tasks, 3 of which are individual WER tests, and a final task to prepare the report for submittal to the Regional Water Quality Control Board. The zinc WER study would consist of 3 minimum tests. The first one would be to test its effect on a water flea. The second test would involve a water flea and a flathead minnow on the effluent. And then the third then would be a zinc WER test with a water flea on simulated downstream water. Following completion of each WER test, Robertson Bryan Inc. would make the recommendation to the city on whether to proceed to the next step. So in other words, if we fail the first step, we're only out that first amount of money. Following the completion of the 3 tests, RBI would prepare a final WER study for submittal to the Water Board. The study would be conducted on a time and materials basis in accordance with the attached scope of work and a not to exceed specific task budgets as shown in attachment 1 of RBI's proposal. So with that, staff is recommending that the council authorize the city manager to negotiate and execute a consulting services agreement with RBI to conduct the zinc water effect ratio study in an amount not to exceed $78,115 And 2, approving a budget appropriation in the amount of $33,115 from the Sewer Enterprise Contingency for unforeseen expenditures for the said agreement with RBI. And with that, I just want to bring to your attention one correction that I failed to make in the staff report, and that's on page 2 at the very top, where we had meant to change that amount from $82,500, which was the current year total estimated cost. It should be then $72,500, $10,000 less. So with that includes staff's report. Be happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
Does anybody have any questions for staff?
I have a real quick one. Pierre, is this what you're saying, what the company is saying, or what, is this like naturally occurring asbestos type thing? That because this is a natural thing? I'm not quite sure that.
Where does the zinc come from?
Yeah, where the zinc comes from, that
El Dorado Irrigation District has the same issue, and a lot of it has to do with the purity of our water. And so, since it's so pure, it's more polarized, and so it can leach metals out of different materials. So in this case, it's our assumption that the zinc is actually coming from the pipes. And so the water is removing zinc from the pipe, and it gets in, and it's in an amount in our influent that comes into the plant. And so what the ferric chloride does is we put the ferric chloride into the influent, and it pulls it out and then pulls it into the sludge. And then, unfortunately, some of it gets put back in, but it's been able to remove enough of the zinc that then is incorporated into the sludge instead of in the effluent that enters into Hangtown Creek. But these WER studies, water effect ratio studies, they're primarily, in fact, I think they're solely for metals. And so from the study I've done, a lot of water treatment facilities have a copper issue, but zinc is one of the other metals that other plants have to deal with. But EID, of course, they're also dealing with the zinc. I hope that answers your question.
it does. So, but another thing then, if this zinc is so, if it's going into the sludge and we sell the sludge, right? People, and they use it other places, it can't be that terrible, but that's why I'm questioning, why.
Yeah, it's probably not an issue because the sludge, of course, is monitored, and it's recycled, so to speak.
Right,
It's
exactly.
taken down to Sacramento for use in agricultural.
My point.
Yeah, but in water,
I
it's
get it.
because
Yeah,
it's
it's
because
water's
when
water.
it's a water quality issue,
Yeah.
and those effects it may have on aquatic life. So again, because this effluent is going into Hangtown Creek water, this is a more specific study to see how well this water has alkalinity and hardness and other organic materials in it that's going to affect the toxicity of that zinc. So the animal isn't sitting in there in pure water with just zinc. It's in water with all these other constituents, and so the zinc is probably going to be much less harmful.
That's
And
interesting.
so hopefully
how
that's
they-
what this study will show.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you.
I have 3 questions. I've been watching the city engineer agree with everything you've been saying, Mr. Rivas. She's got your back. My concern, of course, is that we go through this study, and I appreciate the detail and I understand the necessity. Yet my concern is that we go through this and we succeed, the state changes the zinc standard. To the best of our knowledge, has this been this particular regulation been fairly stagnant as far as the state's level of concern for zinc levels?
I guess the best way to answer that question is again, I think these zinc limitations were based on laboratory studies done on levels of zinc in water in a laboratory, and so that's why. And these are the interim guidelines on determination of use of water effect ratios for metals. It's a whole protocol that was developed by the Environmental Protection Agency, and they've done another more recent update. And again, RBI are experts. It's very interesting to talk to the principal of the company. He's a PhD, I think, in chemistry or something. So he's very up to speed on this kind of stuff. So it's interesting to go through the protocols. It's well beyond probably most of us here how they will go through that. But again, I think it's basically tests to show and demonstrate to the state that the levels of zinc that we're putting into Hangtown Creek will not be harmful to aquatic life. I mean, that's the short and sweet of it.
Okay, good. Thank you. Second question is, how long is this whole test going to take?
Oh, let's see. Let me look at the proposal.
I tried to see if it was in the staff report, but I didn't pick out, like, they can do this sampling in a week's time. And the longer scientists mess with things, it makes me nervous. Things could change. The flows in the plant are going to change. We could have a storm event that...
Well, there was a little bit of urgency for bringing this before you. We had hoped to bring it to the council at our last meeting, but we had some other, staff was working with the finance department to really make sure that we were conservative in our cost benefits. And so the plant is, our current permit is going to expire next year. And so we'd like to have this WER study completed and ready so that when the city receives this new permit for the wastewater treatment facility, that it will then incorporate, or it won't have any new regulations for zinc that we then have to deal with.
That's what I'm worried
under
about.
a new permitting process. So that's sort of what we're trying to meet. And I'm trying to think that it's sometime mid next year that we want to have this done. I'm thinking like March, April, May, somewhere in there.
Okay.
So they want to get started right away, especially with task
I would
one.
love to see it wrap up, because I know these state requirements and the federal requirements are murderous to our operating costs down there. So I guess I'll ask just arbitrarily, my last question was, once we successfully perform this zinc study and we submit those findings to the state, how long will it take before they recognize them and then acknowledge, file, and permanently remove our plant? Do they meet once a year, or do they meet every month for these types of document reviews?
They meet quarterly, but again, I think this will be submitted to them and then will be considered prior to the city's new permitting.
Okay. Thank you. It sounds silly, but it's way more complicated.
It is fascinating.
The bottom line is it costs
us money.
Big bucks for operating
That's the
expenses.
most, for the public to know. That's why we're doing this. For this, that's no problem there. For the sake of the water flea and the fathead minnow, I would like. Zinc was that thing that when you used to buy chemistry. Remember, you used to get chemistry sets, and zinc was always that thing in there, and you never knew what you were going to do with it. It's like it sat in there, and you go. It was a little bar, of zinc, and you never knew what you were going to do with it. Now we know. We're going to poison little fish and fleas. Okay.
Flathead minnow.
Sue, would you like to comment on this?
You can get fish How did we know Sue would want to comment on zinc?
She was leaning into it. She's been halfway through your thing. She was ready to
Has to do with water at our water treatment plant, Measure H, Measure L. Sue Rodman, resident ratepayer. And yes, your body does require a certain minute amount of zinc, but too much is toxic. Just like too much copper is toxic, too much zinc is toxic, too much iron is toxic. So these all are heavy metals that can be toxic if they're in too large amounts. So I see this proposal as a way to have our wastewater treatment be informed by good science instead of just blindly following the state mandate. While the state specifications are intended to provide good water quality, they are one size fits all. And as Pierre said, laboratory water is usually distilled water. That's what you use in a laboratory. What we have in the creek is not distilled water. So this study will give us the opportunity for a site-specific treatment which responds to reality and fits our site and water conditions, which I think is always a better outcome. In addition to better fitting our existing conditions, there is the potential for considerable financial savings, which is another good outcome. I'd like to share a similar experience when I worked for Coca-Cola in quality control. The production plant had its own water quality treatment section to assure high-quality water in the soft drink manufacture. The incoming water was from a limestone watershed, and the standard procedure mandated by Atlanta was to add lime to the water treatment. This seemed illogical to me, so I initiated a study to test whether the lime was needed or helpful. What I found out was that the lime addition was costing double, once to add it and once to take it out. The end result was that my test proved the lime was not needed, added unnecessary expense, and we had water well within specifications without the lime. Getting rid of the lime saved money 3 ways: the cost to purchase the lime, the cost to clean the lime precipitate out of the sand filters, and longer life for the carbon filters. For Placerville's treatment plant, if the study allows reduction in the use of ferric chloride chemical system or fine-tuning it for our site-specific conditions, the reduction in costs would pay for the study in about 2 years and produce ongoing savings. In any case, we will know what our water actually requires, not be just blindly following some one-size-fits-all procedure. I think we need to do this one.
Thank you, Sue. I guess the question then also, there is a budgetary concern here, as we're taking some money out of the Sewer Enterprise Fund contingency for unforeseen expenditures. Mr. Warren, what will that do to our fund? Can we survive?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. You began this fiscal year with $130,000 in your contingency. Before this item came, you had $70,108 in that contingency. So with the additional $33,000 appropriation for Robertson Bryan contract, that would leave you with $36,993 for the remainder of the fiscal year.
Cool. All right. And as it says in the staff report, if this goes according to the way it's supposed to, we potentially could save on an annual basis $54,500, which is more than $33,000. So that's a much better thing. Okay, thank you very much.
I'll move approval of the item.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion second. Would you call the roll? I was going to do that.
Councilmember Acuna?
Aye.
Councilmember Borelli?
Aye.
Mayor Clarici?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Thomas?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilkins?
Aye.
All right, 12.2. Approving a tree removal contract with Hilltop Tree Service in the amount of $17,400 for hazard tree removal within Goldbug Park and along the El Dorado Trail near Smith Flat as part of the Goldbug Park Tree Care and Removal Project, and authorizing the Director of Community Services to execute the same. Mr. Yule.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On March 28, 2016, the El Dorado County Board of Supervisors declared a state of emergency due to tree mortality throughout El Dorado County, making the city eligible for state emergency funding. In order for the city to receive emergency funding from the state, the city was responsible to develop a removal plan and submit it to California Office of Emergency Services, otherwise known as Cal OES. On March 14th, 2017, City Council took the first step in the process by approving a resolution that enabled the city to seek the funding. On May 9th, City Council approved a comprehensive tree mortality hazard plan. The plan was submitted to the OES on May 11th, and on June 29th, it was approved. So the city is now eligible for that funding, and we have 2 projects identified for immediate action. 61 dead or dying trees are slated for removal at Goldbug Park, and an additional 11 trees from the El Dorado Trail in the Smith Flat area. Arborist reports have been conducted. The trees have been marked for removal, And tree removal along the El Dorado Trail will be completed in October, followed by removal of trees within Goldbug Park in November. We still have tours going on at Goldbug through the end of this month. Both sites will be closed during their project. Once the trees are on the ground, slash will be removed from all roadways and trails. This winter, California Department of Forestry hand crews, or Growlersburg, will be brought in to remove slash from areas that are not accessible to vehicles and equipment due to the topography at each site. Once the projects are completed, staff will apply for reimbursement from the state. We received 3 bids for the Goldbug Park project. Hilltop Tree Service, $12,450. Foothill Tree Service, $18,179, and Elder Brothers, $26,000. 2 bids were received for the El Dorado Trail. Hilltop Tree Service at $4,950, and Foothill Tree Service at $8,252. It's been determined by staff that Hilltop Tree Service is the lowest bidder that meets the terms and conditions of both projects and is therefore recommended to perform the work. The City Council appropriated $48,950 for tree removal within Goldbug Park as part of their annual CIP budget. Although the proposed $4,950 for removal of trees along the trail was not within the original scope of that CIP, staff believes the project budget is adequate to absorb the $950 for the trail. Staff anticipates additional funds will be necessary to remove debris from both of the sites. The cost of removal for both sites was anticipated and can be absorbed within the program budget, the CIP budget. Under the Cal OES agreement, the state will refund 75% of all eligible costs, with the remaining 25% share to be paid by the city. The city cannot request reimbursement until each project is completed in its entirety. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have regarding either one of the 2 projects.
Okay. I'm assuming that when you say Smith Flat, you're talking about our side of Jakeway?
Yes, it would be west of
Right, because
Jakeway.
the city-
Yeah,
the
the
city
city's
and
portion of the
Jakeway.
trail.
Okay, cool.
That really steep slope.
Right, yeah. The trees that are being taken out of Goldbug, are they, well, they're being dropped. That's not, I mean, are we going to, I guess the question is, are we going to have to go back in at some point in the future? This, my guess is most of the trees in Goldbug will probably die as a result of this bug. I mean, I don't want to be morbid. You know, these things are nasty. They're out there in large numbers, and there's no reason to believe that the rest of the trees won't succumb at some point. So there's still going to be trees sitting out there, right? That at least aren't
we
dead
have,
yet.
yeah.
Okay.
It's a 2-year, we have a 2-year window for this
Right.
application,
Right,
and
I
then we
understand.
can make subsequent application after that.
Okay,
So
cool.
now we're going to lop and drop them and get them on the ground, and then clean them up this winter and see where we're at.
What are we going to do with the logs after the brush and everything's been cleared away?
A majority, some of them are in really poor condition. The ones closer to the roadways, we'll cut them into rounds and make those available to the public. The ones, because of the topography out there, the other ones we'll probably leave in place and just make sure that we go back in and clean up all the slash. But that's the plan for now. If there is someone out there who would like to make a proposal to repurpose those logs,
Yeah,
that
we
is
talked
an option.
We
and-
talked about that.
and that is
yeah.
within the guidelines
Okay.
of our application. So
Okay.
if someone wants to come forward with an idea, more than willing to work with them.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, thank you. Let's see. That was it for me. Anybody else have any questions?
Just a comment. Steve, I just want to thank you for all your work on the application just to get us to this point as subsequent monitoring the challenge. It represents an inordinate amount of work, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anyone else questions?
Yeah, Steve, I have a question. And I appreciate the fact that you've included the trail because it has had its areas of tree mortality this last 12 months. I noticed that Mr. Warren approved a CIP for $48,000 for gold bug tree removal. And we've gotten our bids, and we're going to go with a combined total of $17,400. Is that correct? Working under our grand amount of $48,000.
Correct.
And if we're successful, the state's going to contribute $13,000. Was it 13,000?
13,050.
So that's a credit back to the CIP?
Yes.
So the actual amount that's coming out, once we get the check from the state,
Yes.
from the $48,000 that was approved in the budget, is actually $4,300?
That's what it looks like to me.
Correct.
Well, I know probably the funds would just go back into the general fund once the project's closed down.
I would hope not.
Because there's certainly, I have feelings that there's a lot more work if we have this kind of excess in a budget that was set aside for just tree removal work at Goldbug Park. A couple thoughts come to mind. One would be to continue with the work that we started this year that was brushing a lot more aggressively along sections of the trail, and also holding a reserve for, sadly, as the Mayor has pointed out, I doubt we're going to have a great flood again this year. There will be more dead trees before this budget runs out, and we will probably be soliciting further tree removal work in both locations, the park and or the trail, or maybe other park. So I just don't. We made a commitment to fund this, and I don't want to lose those dollars. I got a great big sinkhole out there at Goldbug Park that I would love to put that on, but I don't think that's fair. I think this was done with specific park maintenance type activities.
Maybe we could put the slush in the sinkhole.
Well, but I mean, I want us as a group to. Steve has done a great job. If the state comes through on their program, we're going to still have a big chunk of that $48,000 left. So make sure we are ready to apply it as new conditions appear or issues appear.
Sure. No, that's a great idea.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And just a comment on that. Normally, Dave, those CIP funds would stay in that CIP until we bring it back to you to liquidate them. So they don't automatically go back into the general fund.
That's correct. And actually, the matching funds were from the general liability fund, which is a one-time funding source.
Cool. Thank you. Does the public wish to comment on removing trees from Goldbug and from the trail? Oh, I'm sorry.
Now I can talk?
Yes, you may.
Okay, Sue Rodman, resident of Placerville, lover of Goldbug Park and the trail, and I think that this tree work really does need to be done. And I agree with the mayor that we are likely to see more mortality in our trees. When you have a bark beetle infestation like we've had through the Sierras in recent years, it usually lasts for several years before the bark beetle population gets down to the point where it doesn't have any more trees to infest, and so the bark beetle population goes down to normal background levels and you stop seeing this horrendous mortality. So keeping that extra money for additional mortality needs along the trail and the Goldbug Park, I think, is a very good idea. And I've seen Eric Hill's tree work, and he does a good job.
Thank you, Sue. Anybody else wish to speak on the issue of trees dying removed? Okay, great. No, okay, thank you. All right.
I'd be happy to move staff's recommendation to spend this money.
I'll second it.
We have a motion second. Would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Acuna?
Aye.
Councilmember Borelli?
Aye.
Mayor Clarici?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Thomas?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilkins?
Aye.
Okay. All righty. Council reports from other agency meetings, El Dorado County Transit Authority.
No report, and we're also, we're not going to have a transit or transportation meeting this month either. We didn't have enough business, so.
Right. Well, we didn't have the transportation.
I know, but
committee,
we
yeah.
didn't have any.
Transit either.
Yeah,
So.
okay, same thing. All right.
Or 2x2.
LAFCO.
LAFCO, always exciting, always lots of room in the audience. I'm happy to report that LAFCO's headquarters is going to remain right across the street.
Was there some worry that they
there
were gonna
was some discussion earlier this year that the lease is up, and Jose did due diligence and went out and looked at several sites and did all that whole rental thing, and came up with a very nice new lease. And so LAFCO will be across the street.
Oh, good.
Great.
Like
Well,
the
that's
next
good.
10 years.
Thank God. Okay.
LAFCO.
Thank LAFCO. Sacramento Area Council of Governments. We had a retreat. We retreated last week on Thursday and Friday, most of the day Friday. As I've mentioned to you before, SACOG is talking about this, kind of what do they want to be. Transportation, their primary function is as a transportation planning entity. They allocate funds through the federal and state programs. They're the Metropolitan Planning Organization. Even though we still have our own Transportation Commission up here, we still have to submit all of our requests through SACOG. They do all of our air quality conformity on the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, blah, blah, blah. But that's kind of a very narrow focus, and it's sort of like they have this big giant, they're also a council of governments, it's in the name. And so they've been talking about this for a while now, about if there's other things that they would like to sort of engage as this forum, potentially. And we have a new executive director, James Corliss, who's been on now for about 6 months or 7 months, I guess. So we had this retreat, and we talked about a bunch of things, and a lot of it was just simply, are there these areas that maybe the Council of Governments could start to do? And the traditional ones have been homelessness and the issues with PERS and other things, and then sort of how do they do that, and where emergency response services, that sort of stuff. So and it was very good. It was all day. I was there with Supervisor Veerkamp, and nothing remarkable really to report, except that there is a lot of energy to start to tackle some of these bigger issues. Not to say that SACOG would take them over. In fact, that's probably the furthest thing from the truth. They see themselves as a forum to advance discussions and then getting resources together with.
Why do we have them?
Why do we have SACOG? Well, you have to.
I know, but I know, but I just wanted you to
Oh,
explain.
why do they have them? Okay. Well, you can't get money without. I mean, they literally.
That's
yes.
what the money. Okay.
Yes. In fact, that was a funny thing. They actually asked that. Well, they do all these little exercises. One of those was, "Why is there SACOG?" And I wrote that. I said because the law says they have to be there, and I need them to get money. Which is absolutely factual. The law specifies that they are the MPO, they write the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, and they are the conduit for all things transportation, especially if you live in the 4 counties that are actually in SACOG, not Placer County or El Dorado County. We're part of SACOG, but we have our own transportation commissions. Right. If you're down there, they are the Transportation Commission for that region.
Right.
So they have to be there, and then they do all this conformity analysis, and they're the keepers of all of that. So by law, they have to exist. But they're also a Council of Governments, which is much more loosely organized and doesn't have necessarily a thing that they're supposed to do. And I think that from a survival standpoint, SACOG is looking at that function and saying, we would like to start to be more active in that. Mm-hmm. And there's models out there. I went to the Mid-America Association of Governments, Council. That's MARC. That's all I remember, the acronym. And they are a much more active cog. They actually bring folks in. They talk to each other about very important things and stuff like that. So it was a very good day, and they talked a lot about that. And there's some issues that are obviously big for the region that need to be discussed. But then there's also smaller things that might come out of it too. So anyway, it was a good thing. That was it. Oh, we just also have a gentleman. There was a transportation committee meeting on that Thursday. So Thursday was that, and then the retreat. And it's talking about sort of the future of retail, the future of buying, positioning yourself as an economic driver, and things are changing. And so it was interesting. Placerville's sort of in a unique place because even though we're a sales tax city, we're not like some cities that have sold their souls to big giant boxes. Home Depot, we love you. But that see especially some of the shopping mall type things disappearing.
They're absolutely disappearing.
Disappearing.
Right.
And so they have a big concern about that. So it was very interesting. I'll try to get the information. We're in better shape than a lot of places. So in that regard, We have to broaden out our tax base and do some other stuff. We all know that. But anyway, so that was very interesting as well, and he had a lot of information. I'll try to get it up here. I asked them for the slideshows, and they don't always send them to me. I think I don't know why. I try to be nice.
Well,
okay. Yes?
You're saying they're disappearing, but it's because of Amazon.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know,
Oh, yeah.
and people are ordering a lot of stuff through the mail. And fortunately, I think the businesses that we have don't require it. I mean,
A
they're-
little less so.
you know,
I mean, obviously,
yeah,
people aren't gonna get
exactly. They're not,
2x4s
you know,
or
we've got our.
Well, I hope not. But yeah, and cars.
Well-
Well, even cars, you can buy them on it.
Well, you can, but I don't
But
think
the
you're
money
going
still
to.
comes here. You could buy it on the internet, and the money still comes here. Cars are perfect. They come back here.
The taxes.
The tax comes back here, not the cars themselves.
Not the cars.
Not necessarily. Okay. So that's SACOG. 2x2.
No report.
Any requests for future agenda items?
Yes, I have one.
Oh,
Oh,
yay.
wow.
And you all graciously, just about a year ago, it's been a long time, agreed to and start to investigate a huge issue, and it just recently peaked again, and that is the lack of capacity on Highway 50 westbound, and starting that very long process. And I just wondered if, it's been a year now, if we've had any opportunity to start that year one of 20 to get that process started with Caltrans. Probably we've all heard, for example, last Saturday, all those folks going to Apple Hill, the traffic was stopped at Cambridge on eastbound Highway 50 all the way up to the first traffic light. And then, of course, it turns around and comes back the other. Had several eyewitnesses to that on Saturday morning. Right. I don't know what it was about this past Saturday, but it exploded. And then Caltrans, just in October, instituted their closures up on Highway 50 on the non-standard, cross over the road kind of ramps,
Right.
which then throws a tremendous amount of congestion into all of Camino. And
Right.
so I just thought I would ask if we've gotten started down that trail.
We actually brought that up. We had a meeting with James Corliss up here last week, and we brought that up to him and told him not that. I mean, we would have to initiate that locally, but we told him that that's a big issue, and that's it. Supervisor Vierkamp and I have talked about this quite a bit, and it's one of those things where there has to be kind of a short-term fix that might help, and we discussed a few things. A medium-term fix, which might be like your Ox Lane going westbound. Potentially, I mean, the Ox Lane going this way. It's a different animal going uphill than downhill. It seems like it's all the same traffic, but it really is kind of different. I imagine the Ox Lane would work. And then, of course, the long term might be, removing the lights and doing something with the freeway.
Which is never going to happen.
Well, thank you
So-
for that, Debbie
Sorry
Downer,
to
but
tell you that.
I think it's a very long-term thing. But, I mean, we can do maybe some things, but we do need to initiate that.
Yeah, I
and,
would appreciate
and,
that.
But you know what, John? I remember not too long ago talking with Caltrans. This is through transportation.
Yeah.
That we had quite a conversation, and I think they did a feasibility study on because we're talking about adding a westbound lane, and it was knocking into that hill and creating another line. And I know that there were studies. I'm going to talk to Woody about and get the report. And it's a cost. Obviously, it's a cost thing.
Well, and getting it into the
And,
STIP.
exactly.
Unless it can be like an operational thing.
Exactly.
If we could maybe in the next, whatever, get some sort of a push so we let Caltrans know we're digging our...
I will talk to Woodrow.
I'm talking to Woodrow.
Well, then you can talk to Woodrow. Okay. Does our city manager want to
both
weigh
gonna
in on
talk
this
to
at all with some
I just-
actual facts? Just
well,
not us talking?
I don't know if I have actual
Stop
facts.
this babbling.
I just want to mention that other than, like you say, the comments we've talked to SACOG about it, and I have, when I've met with Caltrans, I've brought it up with some of them, but nothing formal yet in terms of moving something forward.
First step would do a project study report. and
I
you-
swear that there's something. I'm going to find out.
Yeah, but you have to do I mean, if you
I
get
can probably
serious, the first step is the project study report, and that
Yeah.
gives you all the stuff, and then you can decide, am I not? Engineer.
Mr. Mayor, how can I help?
Well, we would have to initiate, because it's
What
a
are the
state.
steps we take?
I mean, it's a state highway, so we would have to get Caltrans to agree with it, and then we'd have to do like a PSR and then that sort of thing. We'd get into that process.
We do have a standing meeting with Caltrans every month that basically is the precursor to even that level of effort.
Okay.
We actually have a conference call tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. and it's to look at ITS, which is basically integrated traffic systems, which allows for smart traffic divergence. But once that effort is exhausted, the next step is exactly what has been talked about, is adding in the additional westbound lane.
I heard that they put some cameras up that were supposed to facilitate the light setup and all that. Did that happen, or is it happening, or did it work?
They have adjusted the timing of the signals on Highway 50 through town many times over. And the ITS is actually more tied to your Bluetooth on your cell
like
phones.
the people wayfinding
Right,
and stuff
exactly.
like that.
Waze is
Waze,
a program that is integrated with that. And then the other facet of that is the timing for the lights. They're triggered by a series of several different things.
Right.
If you have a pedestrian that crosses, it resets all the timing.
Right.
But then you start getting into driver behavioral patterns where if the light stays green for too long, say in excess of 120 seconds, which is about as long as you want to go, pedestrians or drivers in the opposite direction become impatient. They think that the light is broken, then they will go, when that is actually not the case. So there's a fine line between allowing the clearing out through the 120-second signal delay. And then there's been several studies. But the other thing, too, is, traffic on Highway 50 has increased excessively in the last 10 years. And we actually have information from Caltrans that supports that, too. Yes. But we are not ignoring the problem. We are doing our due diligence to show that we're exhausting all the financially friendly and feasible options first, because the project that we've talked about is a very expensive one.
Yes.
Does that answer your question?
Removing the lights.
Well, that would be extraordinarily, but even putting in that ox lane, cutting into that hill would become very expensive.
Well, that's
very
it,
quickly.
yeah.
Okay, that's very good. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Anyway, and maybe what we ought to do is do like a little. Once you find out, when you're in discussions with with Caltrans, kind of actually, this would be good for the Transportation Commission, maybe. Come up with like a little schematic that says, okay, if we do this, then this would be the next thing. Kind of give folks an idea of kind of the steps. I'm sure in some document it already exists, but yeah.
We're happy to provide an update if you'd like one.
Okay, thank you. That would be great.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Any other things that we would like to do? City manager and staff reports. Nothing? Okay. Upcoming items. Items tentatively scheduled for the next regular scheduled city council meeting of October 24th, 2017 include Extra Mile Day proclamation, Corp Yard repairs, community services registration software, El Dorado Trail emergency projects, an amendment to agreement with HDL. I want to bring up this extra mile thing. Do we have to suggest things? I'm sorry. I got your email and I said I'd get back to you, and now I'm here.
The proclamation is something that we did last year.
Right.
Naming individuals or organizations in the community is optional. It's just another thing you can do in addition to the proclamation.
Okay, cool. All right. We'll have to send me names. I don't know, how do we want to be equitable, but, on the other hand, why not just Sue, send me a name of somebody that's gone the extra mile besides yourself. Okay.
Well, you know what? Maybe you ought to tell what it's extra mile, what it is.
I'd have to remember that, and I know it's very important, and I'd have to look it up on my phone.
Well, maybe
perhaps our clerk would like to tell
maybe
us.
Regina knows. Do you know? We're putting you on the spot. I think what you just said, it's somebody who has gone.
Yeah.
And it's to give recognition to somebody or some organization. I guess, can it be an organization
It could
or
be an
does
organization.
An organization or an individual that has done something for the community that you feel is
to help
important.
to help the community.
Okay. Cool. Yes, it is. All right. We are now going to adjourn to closed session. We're back. Would you like to report out on the closed session?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, today in closed session, the council voted unanimously with Councilmember Thomas absent, so all the remaining council members voted in favor of approving agreement with Richard and Darlene Rude for the purchase of property located, the lot is not next to the police department, but one lot down from that. And I don't have the address. Well, the address is on your 718 Main Street, but for $100,000, and the city will be paying the closing costs with respect to the transaction. Escrow will close on or before December 15th. And a copy of the agreement, should anybody want to see it, is at City Hall and City Manager's office.
Thank you very much. All right, and with that, go home.